Hey, Spurs students, we are here today to talk about Unit 2 goals. This will be a pretty brief video, though of course there's a quiz at the end of it for you to follow along, just to double check that you understand what we'll be doing in this unit. So, in Unit 1, we really focused on research and summary skills, and right now you're probably thinking about revising that first essay and figuring out how to make that map of the controversy even more accurate and give it even more detail. But in this unit, we're going to also be training our minds to think about analysis and focusing on analytic skills. You've done this in school, of course, but analysis is, by definition, the process of breaking something down into its constituent parts and then putting a label on them. So taking a complex object and breaking it down into the elements, basically, that make it up. You do this in chemistry, you do this in biology. If you do dissection, you do this in anatomy. You do this in physics when you think about the forces that are pushing on something. And you'll do it here in rhetoric when you think about the sort of elemental parts that make up a persuasive speech. So day to day in class, you'll be practicing these analytic skills. And in some ways, the relationship between what you're doing with your high school teacher and what you're doing in these videos will be a little bit closer, because now we're really going to put those foundational skills that we learned in Unit 1 into play, while continuing to focus on providing you tools for analysis. And in rhetoric, that's the language of rhetorical appeals. Appeals are the ways that a rhetor or a text sort of reaches out to the audience and asks the audience to give the rhetor their belief, to give the rhetor their trust, and to do or believe what the rhetor is asking them to do. We call those appeals. So what are some of the challenges in Unit 2? Here's one of the biggest ones. Actually, it's almost that you know too much, or you think you know too much. Because many of you have probably used ethos, pathos, and logos before to talk about text. Many of you are probably very sophisticated in it. I find that students who've worked with these before sometimes make the mistake of thinking that an analysis is just saying this author or this rhetor uses ethos, pathos, and logos in her speech. That's not enough. Literally every persuasive text uses all three rhetorical appeals. So I always kind of tell my students on campus, that's the same thing as having your thesis sentence be, this essay will use words to describe something. Like, yes, of course, that's not an argument, and it's not an insight to say that ethos, pathos, and logos are used. As a rhetorical analyst, your task is to talk about how they're used, to talk about how they speak to an audience, to talk about the success with which they speak to that audience, and to to analyze them and to say, like, this text uses a lot of emotional appeals and it doesn't use so many logical appeals, though of course all three are present. So that's one big challenge, which is that if you've used these before, you have to recognize that it's just not sufficient to say, I found ethos, pathos, and logos in this article. Another one, don't forget about the things that we learned in Unit 1, and particularly don't forget about audience. Identifying and considering the audience is really crucial to the success of the essay that you'll do at the end of Unit 2. So making sure that you don't confuse your responses to a text with the responses of the intended audience. And making sure that you ground all the work that you do in this. When you talk about how ethos, pathos, and logos work, you are always talking about how they work to a member of the intended audience, not necessarily how they work to you. And of course, lastly, you have to remain neutral and objective. Your job is to think about what kinds of appeals and claims are persuasive to a specific audience and to describe them. Your job is not to evaluate the argument being made or judge the argument being made. There are moments where I'll say you're going to evaluate the success of this appeal, which means that you'll say, I believe an audience would or would not find this appeal persuasive. But your job is, again, not to say I agree with this argument or I disagree with this argument, or I think this argument is good, or I think this argument is bad, or I think it could be better if the rhetor had done X. those are not appropriate responses. Again, just like in the first unit, I should read your papers and have no idea what your side of the controversy is, what your take on the controversy is. Unit 2 assignments. Take a deep breath, breathe a sigh of relief. There's less writing in Unit 2 than there was in Unit 1. In Unit 1, you had to do a lot of research summaries up front because it's really important that you get into that mode of doing research and summary in order to effectively write the essay. For Unit 2, you're just going to write one research summary. So I won't go over the specifics of it, but of course make sure that you read the assignment prompt for Research Summary 4 because it will ask you again to do something new, to do something a little different at the end of it, just like in your previous research summaries. And you'll write an essay for this unit that's a rhetorical analysis essay, a focused description of a single persuasive text in your controversy. This essay is going to describe and summarize the text. It's going to identify the rhetor and the audience. It's going to analyze the rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, and logos. And it's going to indicate whether or not the text would successfully persuade the audience. And just as in Unit 1, you'll submit your paper for feedback and a grade, then you'll revise and you'll resubmit a new version based on the feedback that you receive. So you'll continue investing in that writing process. And hopefully you'll start to sort of gain a little bit of a relationship, even if it's just an intellectual relationship, with your grader. And so you'll know kind of what comments they're going to make, how they're going to talk about things, and that will help you as you think about revision. Okay, let's wrap up by thinking about how this unit will help you in college. So analytical thinking is a form of problem solving. It's being able to take a complex subject and break it down into parts. So I can't overstate how important this skill is for what you do in college and for what you do out in the real world. This is a task that you'll do in almost every course in college. And this skill set that you're building applies to both humanities and sciences. I just kind of threw out some areas around there earlier, but if you're thinking about a career in medicine of any sort or in nursing, you'll be doing this in biology where you'll be, breaking down physical entities into their discrete parts so that you can recognize like where trouble is. You'll do this if you think about engineering with physics. You'll be breaking down what are all the different forces that are in action in any particular problem and any particular puzzle that you're presented. You'll do this in chemistry by breaking down various compounds into their original parts and seeing how these elements fit together. But you'll do this in the humanities too. You'll do this in any of your English courses, any of your history courses. You'll be tasked with problems that you have to break down into their component parts and think about how those parts fit together and how they work together. The line between the humanities and the sciences is not as solid and firm as people often think it is. There's always kind of this belief among my students that scientific thinking is something that you do with one side of your brain, and the creative or humanities thinking is something that you do with the other side of your brain. And while of course there's some evidence to support that, right, the left-brained people tend to be more analytic, and right-brained people tend to be more creative. But nonetheless, like the work that you do in college actually is skill sets that build across all these different disciplines. Analysis is something that you'll do in every discipline, and if you get better at it here in this class, you'll be better at it in your math class, you'll be better at it in your physics class, you'll be better at it in your history class, you'll be better at it in chemistry. And this is something that employers always ask for. When they do studies, surveys of employers for graduates here from UT, like where UT graduates go, the business school does a big survey where they ask the people who employ people in the Austin area, what's the number one skill that you would like people to have? And employers always say that people come out of college really well versed in their major. So business students are really good at business presentations. Engineering students are really good at the equations involved in engineering. But what they want from virtually every student is better reading skills, better analysis skills, and better critical thinking skills. Better abilities in breaking down things into different parts and then thinking critically about them. So the skills that you're building here are actually going to make you very competitive when you get to the job market. They're going to give you the edge because you're going to already be thinking about how to solve problems. Okay, that's it for this. So I'm excited to work with you in Unit 2, and I hope you're excited too, because analysis, I think, is really fun and challenging and just an exciting thing to do in rhetoric. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye.